One day, shrouded in a heavy veil of anxiety and uncertainty, the Marquis of Renati's estate stretched out, illuminated by the faint light of hope for the return of his missing daughter. The story of the disappearance of Arabella, the Marquise's daughter, spread around the neighborhood like a sad messenger, bringing sorrow and despair to the hearts of her family. Long days and nights filled with restless searches and prayers did not bring the desired result, and Arabella remained undiscovered, as if vanished into thin air, leaving only unanswered questions. The situation became more complicated every day, because the news of the missing daughter of the Marquis attracted the attention of many impostors who sought to take advantage of the desperation of parents. With each appearance of Arabella, who turned out to be another fraud, the hearts of the parents were filled with more and more despair and pain, exacerbating the already difficult atmosphere in the house. At such times, when the Renati home was enveloped in silent grief, the youngest daughter, Anita, endowed with childlike spontaneity and a desire to help, decided to invite her mother to dinner, trying to dispel the heavy atmosphere in some way. As she approached her mother, however, Anita found that her entire attention was consumed with thoughts of the missing Arabella. The mother, burdened with fear and anxiety about the fate of her eldest daughter, was unable to pay proper attention to her youngest, whose heart was full of desire to support and comfort. Thus, the story of the disappearance of the daughter of the Marquis of Renati became not only a search for a missing soul, but also a test for all members of the family, torn by fear, despair, and, at the same time, the thirst to find any trace that could return the lost hope. At the moment when the tension in the air reached its climax, the Marquis of Renati, whose emotions were on the brink, could not find it in herself to bear the sight of her daughter Anita, and with bitterness in her heart sent her to her room, seeking refuge from the pain which the sight of the girl was causing her. Anita, stunned and full of a desire to comfort and be by her mother's side in this difficult hour, extended her hand to her in a gesture of peace and support. But the Marquise, caught up in the whirlwind of her feelings, could not accept the gesture. Instead of accepting her daughter's hand, she screamed and pushed her hand away as if the touch itself were unbearable. Anita, sensing the rejection, immediately turned around, leaving the Marquise alone with her grief. The Marquise, meanwhile, exhausted and broken, sat down by the crib where her other daughter, Arabella, whose disappearance had been an unspeakable blow to her. There, in the privacy of her grief, she allowed herself to sob, immersed in the memories of her lost daughter. This moment left a deep mark on the Marquise's heart, reminding her that the wounds left by loss don't heal for long and sometimes remain open, a reminder of the pain that time cannot heal. The fate of the Renati family was inextricably linked to the continuation of their ancient lineage, and so when Arabella, the firstborn of the family, disappeared without a trace, the parents faced the question of the need for an heir. In this world where a family's every move was determined by tradition and obligations to ancestors, Anita's birth was an answer to prayers for the continuation of the lineage. However, the inner turmoil of her parents shrouded the girl's birth in a shadow of grief and despair. They were convinced that loving a child conceived in an attempt to heal the open wounds of loss would be tantamount to betraying the memory of Arabella. This belief laid the foundation of isolation and loneliness for Anita, who grew up in the shadow of her missing sister, never fully feeling the warmth of parental love and acceptance. This story tells of the tragic paradox when attempts to preserve the memory of the lost leave a new life in exile from the hearts of loved ones. Anita, born in a moment of her parents' deepest despair, grew up in a world where her existence was filled with the tacit acknowledgement that she was nothing more than a substitute for the lost. In this silence, saturated with unspoken words and love not given, Anita searched for her place, trying to understand and accept the role fate had assigned her in the history of her family. In this world where Anita felt like a lonely island amidst a stormy sea of family dramas and incurable wounds, there was a beacon of hope and genuine concern. That beacon was Axion Rakide, her fiancé and heir to the Archduke, who had been not only her faithful companion but her only friend since childhood. Contrary to conventional norms and traditions that often dictated cold calculation in choosing a life partner, their relationship was built on a deep mutual understanding and sincere affection that grew out of years of friendship and shared memories. While Anita's parents were consumed with memories and the search for the missing Arabella, Axion became Anita's support and refuge from the storms that never subsided in her home. He, realizing the depth of her loneliness and alienation, took a step so rare for a man of his position. He invited Anita to become part of his family. This invitation was not a mere formality due to their betrothal, but a sincere desire to share with her the warmth and acceptance that was so lacking in her life. Axion, unlike many others, saw Anita not as a shadow of her missing sister, but as a distinctive person, deserving of love and happiness. His actions broke stereotypes and prejudices, demonstrating that true care and affection can cross any boundaries imposed by society or family obligations. Being invited into the Axion family was an important turning point for Anita, giving her a new perspective on a world where she is valued and loved not for her title or background, but for the unique person she is. Suddenly, fate decided to make adjustments in the life of the Renati family, presenting an event that was a real shock to all members of the family. The Renati house, which for years had been shrouded in a shroud of loneliness and longing for the missing Arabella, suddenly came alive with news that was like a miracle. Arabella, the daughter, the sister, the dream they had never stopped thinking about even for a moment, was coming home. A whole 19 years had passed, full of prayers and forlorn hopes, and here she was, Arabella, back among her own, returning from the abyss of time like a heroine of ancient legends. The confirmation of her identity was nothing less than an imperial gift she received as a child. This object, endowed not only with material but also symbolic value, was the key to her identity, unmistakably indicating that the girl before them was none other than the long-awaited Arabella Renati. The return, shrouded in an aura of mysticism and predestination, could not leave the family members and the world around them indifferent. It was not just a homecoming, it was a moment when broken hearts found solace and years of waiting and despair found meaning. For Anita, who had spent her whole life feeling like a shadow of her missing sister, the news of Arabella's return was a test of unprecedented power. Her heart was filled with a whirlwind of conflicting feelings, from joy for her family to the inevitable fear of being forgotten and invisible again. Arabella's return carried both the promise of healing the long-standing wounds of the Renati family and the foreshadowing of new challenges for Anita, who, against all odds, had to find the strength to accept a new chapter in the book of her life. Since Arabella's triumphant return to the Renati family, Anita's life has become a series of ongoing trials and hardships. Her parents, trying to make up for the lost years and provide Arabella with a life abundant in love and attention, have crossed the line of reasonableness. Their concern turned into an obsessive desire to do everything for one daughter, while summarily ignoring the feelings and needs of the other. They wanted Arabella to have the best of everything possible, not only what Anita had, but what she couldn't even dream of. This quest for justice in their eyes took the form of an unprecedented injustice. They began to take away Anita's belongings, each of which was part of her life and history, depriving her of her personal space and memories. But the cruelest test for Anita was her parents' decision to break her engagement to Axion Rakiti, the only man who had been by her side all her life, supporting and understanding her like no one else. The decision to break off the engagement was not a mere whim or a desire to right the wrongs of the past. It was a cold calculation. Arabella was to marry Axion to strengthen the already powerful Renati family, bringing it even more glory and influence. In the eyes of their parents, the union of Arabella and Axion was seen as the perfect union that would be the crowning achievement of their aspirations and efforts to revive the family's greatness. Anita finds herself pushed into a corner of her own destiny, facing the betrayal of those she thought closest to her. Her love and devotion, which she had given unconditionally to her family, was met with cold calculation and indifference. This turn of events not only tested her inner strength and determination, but also forced her to rethink her place in a world where the rules of the game are determined not by feelings, but by cold profit. The situation in the Rennetti household grew more complicated by the day, reaching a boiling point when the Marquis of Rennetti, without restraint of emotion, expressed her indignation at Arabella's inability to marry Axion. Her words, full of despair and frustration, found an echo in the heart of her husband, the Marquis of Rennetti, who promised to make every effort to remedy the situation. This storm of feeling was not only to restore justice in their eyes, but also to secure the future they thought Arabella deserved. Marquis, while expressing his support and understanding to his wife, simultaneously found a role for Anita in his plans, stating that he needed her help around the house and in running things. This decision, which appeared at first glance as a recognition of Anita's importance, in fact only emphasized her secondary position in the family. The Marquis argued that Arabella deserved to be happy, thus implying that one daughter's happiness was above the well-being of the other. Anita, overhearing this conversation, found herself at a loss and confused. On the one hand, she saw that her parents were willing to do anything for Arabella's happiness, even if it meant sacrificing Anita's interests. On the other hand, her own future and happiness didn't seem to matter in the eyes of her family. These thoughts and feelings created a whirlwind in Anita's soul, leaving her lonely and misunderstood even by those closest to her. The dilemma Anita faced was not only how to tell Axion what she had heard, but how to find her place in a world where her own wants and needs seemed invisible to those she loved. This moment becomes a turning point in her life, forcing her to rethink her relationship with her family and determine what is truly important to her. Just as the silence enveloped the room, echoing in the corners of Anita's heart, there was a sudden knock on the door. That sound cut through the air, upsetting the delicate balance of emotion that reigned between Anita and Axion. Not a soul in the room could even guess who might be behind the door, thus adding another mystery to the already confusing story of their lives. Anita turned toward the door and assumed the role of mistress of the moment. With every step she took toward the door, the tension rose, as if it were a harbinger of change to come. And when she finally opened the door, behind her was the Marquis Renetti, whose presence at this moment seemed as unexpected as it was exciting. The Marquise herself, the owner of power and respect, stood before the threshold, but her eyes read an unusual request. She was making a request that could change the course of their destinies. The Marquise asked Anita to organize a meeting between Arabella and Axion. It was more than a simple request. It was a test for everyone involved in the story. Anita was thus faced with a choice that could not only determine her own future, but also the future of the relationship between the two families. At this moment in time, she became the primary link connecting the past to a possible future where every decision and action she made carried weight. Anita could accept that Arabella was getting everything that Anita couldn't afford, but Anita couldn't give Arabella Axion as well. Anita closed the door behind her and declared that she would not introduce Arabella to Axion. In response, the Marquise Renati accused Anita of cruelty. Anita, standing in front of the closed door, felt the weight of her decision. Her heart was filled with a mixture of feelings, where the bitterness of betrayal and the struggle for her own happiness merged into one. She realized that the world she had grown up in, where every step and every word was weighed with care, now required her to make a decision that could change her life forever. Marquise Renati, stunned by Anita's refusal, could not contain her indignation. Her words, full of accusations against Anita, cut through the air like a blade. The Marquise argued that Anita's refusal to introduce Arabella to Axion was an act of pure cruelty and selfishness, while ignoring the depth of feeling and the complexity of her daughter's situation. But to Anita, standing behind the closed door, the Marquise's words were only an echo of long-accumulated pain and loneliness. She had already compromised for too long, trying to please her parents, sacrificing her own desires and dreams. But the question of Axion was not only about her personal happiness, but also about her personal pride and dignity. Anita knew that her decision would cause a flurry of resentment and perhaps even alienation from her family, but she also realized that some things in life were worth fighting for. Axion wasn't just a fiancé, he was her support, the only man who saw her true essence and loved her for it. In that moment, Anita made the decision to not only protect her love for Axion, but to start fighting for her own place in a world where her wants and needs had been ignored until now. The situation in the Renati house had escalated to the extreme. The Marquise Renati, in her anger and frustration, hurls a wave of accusations at Anita, not noticing how her words hurt not only Anita but also Arabella. Arabella, an unexpected witness to this conflict, tried to intervene, but her efforts only resulted in her becoming a victim of the situation herself. The fright and stress of the Marquise's sudden screaming and her attempts to persuade her to stop caused Arabella to pass out, causing her mother to panic. At this point, Anita, despite her previous quarrel and tension with the Marquise, showed herself to be a responsible and caring sister. She instantly realized the seriousness of the situation and went to fetch a doctor, putting aside all grudges and disagreements for the sake of Arabella's health. The Marchesa, left alone with her unconscious daughter, may have faced the consequences of her actions and words for the first time. Her concern for Arabella forced her to rethink her behavior and perhaps even understand how her actions might have affected both daughters. This incident was a turning point in the history of the Renati family, forcing everyone to reflect on the value of family ties and the importance of support and understanding between family members. For Anita, however, it was another step toward realizing her role not only as a daughter, but also as an independent person, ready to act for the good of her loved ones, even if it requires her to temporarily put aside personal grudges and disagreements. Walking down the narrow corridor of the ancient mansion, Anita suddenly bumped into a maid who was hurrying about her business. At that moment, without wasting a second, she quickly gave her orders to immediately find a doctor for Arabella, who had suddenly lost consciousness and fainted. Like a frightened bird, the maid turned and ran for help, and the pot slipped out of her hands with a clatter and shattered on the floor. Left alone in the corridor, Anita thought for a moment. Her thoughts were full of doubts that Arabella might really have some health problems. Suddenly a smile appeared on her face. She realized that Arabella was probably faking fainting to outsmart her. Anita realized that it was all just a cunning plan to evade her and meet Axion. This moment of revelation made Anita marvel at Arabella's resourcefulness and ingenuity, even though she had been deceived. In a secluded room of the mansion where time seemed to stop, a very tense meeting was taking place. Arabella, taking a seat across from Axion, began to apologize for her sudden appearance, unprepared by any warning. Her voice trembled, and there was not only guilt but also a certain uneasiness in its wavering. Arabella felt a wave of coldness envelop her as she thought about the fact that, for all Axion's outward courtesy and nobility, he instilled fear in her. In his presence, she felt like she was on the edge of a precipice, desperately trying to keep her balance. Never before had Arabella allowed the thought that her plan could have failed, much less that she would faint at the most crucial moment. Nevertheless, the sudden fainting was a surprise to her, but the joy of a quick return to reality was overshadowed by fear. She was relieved that she had recovered quickly enough not to frighten her mother to the extreme. Arabella was aware of the complexity of the moment she found herself in, and her heart beat in unison with every second that passed in this intense dialogue with Axion. After Arabella came to her senses, it was her mother who, grasping a unique opportunity, offered her daughter an exceptional opportunity. She advised Arabella to meet with Axion despite the girl's mixed feelings, especially her concern for Anita. This proposal was a challenge for Arabella. On the one hand, she did not want to contradict her parents' wishes and tried to meet their expectations. On the other hand, she was overwhelmed by the thought that she was violating etiquette by coming to Axion's house without prior approval. The gravity of the breach of etiquette was so strong that Arabella could barely breathe. She felt the air grow heavy, and each breath was a reminder that she had stepped onto a path she herself thought was wrong. In the back of her mind, Arabella knew that she was putting herself in a vulnerable position by breaking established rules and traditions, which made her even more susceptible to any criticism or disapproval from Axion. Despite the internal struggle and mental torment, the desire not to disappoint my parents took over. Arabella, feeling obliged to apologize for her unexpected appearance, turned to Axion again to ask for forgiveness. Axion didn't seem to give it much thought, however, waving his hand and emphasizing that Arabella was in his house by no choice of her own. Those words made Arabella wonder how much Axion could have learned from listening to her earlier conversation with her mother. At this point, a smile appeared on Axion's face when he mentioned Anita's imminent return, which surprised Arabella even more. The way he said Anita's name was so gentle and warm that Arabella couldn't help but notice this peculiarity in his voice, reflecting his deep feelings for Anita. Meanwhile, Anita, standing outside the door, was trapped in her own emotions. She struggled with the waves of anger that were rising in her toward both her mother and Arabella. This storm of feelings was caused not only by Arabella's unexpected appearance in the house, but also by the general situation in which she was involved without her knowledge. The complexity of Anita's emotional state was that she was forced to confront not only the external circumstances associated with the unexpected visit, but also the internal dilemma associated with her feelings and relationships with others. At Renati Manor, where every corner breathed history and secrets, the mood was tense, especially with regard to Anita. She felt the hard stares of the people of the manor who seemed to accuse her of all mortal sins, just as if she had taken away everything that was dear to Arabella. This atmosphere of unspoken accusations and innuendo made Anita think seriously about her position in this house and the future that awaited her. With these heavy thoughts about the future and how she could mend her relationship with the people of the manor, Anita knocked on the door of Axion's room. The thought entered her heart that perhaps, for the sake of the peace of the manor and her own peace of mind, she would have to give way to Arabella if she wanted to find acceptance here. Axion was the only person in the entire estate who seemed to be the light at the end of the tunnel for her, the only support in this whirlwind of events and emotions. When the door opened and she entered, a strange and incomprehensible feeling swept over her as she glanced at Arabella. At that moment, Arabella, with a smile radiating sincerity and lightness, jumped up to Anita, apologizing for her sudden fainting. This gesture of Arabella's, full of attention and apology, made Anita feel even more embarrassed and affected. Anita pondered the events that had brought her sister Arabella back to the family domain, fearing that Arabella had come to take everything that belonged to Anita. After years of absence, when everyone had come to terms with the idea that Arabella was lost forever, her sudden appearance raised many questions. Where had Arabella been wandering all these years? What made her come back now? In this atmosphere of misunderstanding and doubt, Arabella exchanged glances with Axion, which only added to the murkiness of an already confusing story. Anita, unwilling to tolerate this tension, strongly suggested that her sister leave, not even hoping Arabella would agree. Arabella, embarrassed but not without dignity, accepted the decision with enthusiasm and gratitude. Her bow of appreciation to Anita and her joyful smile at parting were complete contrast to her mystery story. She wished Anita a good day and, inspired, left the room, leaving behind questions and reticence. Standing alone, Anita felt the weight of thoughts of sisterly rivalry and the differences in their fates. Her sister Arabella, despite all the years spent in obscurity, perhaps in hardship and struggle, returned home with a cheerfulness and ease that seemed impossible for one who had endured such trials. While Anita, who grew up within the safe and comfortable walls of the estate, felt deprived of the same carefree and joyfulness from an early age. The next moment, when the silence between the walls of Renati Manor seemed to breathe past and present, Anita, with a note of embarrassment in her voice, turned to Axion. She apologized for the fact that her parents might have seemed rude in their communication or actions. Axion, a man of peace and understanding, brushed it off easily, claiming that the whole thing was not worth the attention. However, despite his levity and willingness to forgive misunderstandings, Anita felt that the atmosphere of the tea party had been somewhat spoiled and suggested that their meeting be concluded. Axion, always a gentleman and a friend of the family, stood up, agreeing to her suggestion. But before he left, he suggested a splendid idea. The next tea party should be held on his own estate. The gesture was filled not only with an offer of hospitality, but also with support, a sign that the friendship and respect between them had not been tarnished by the failed tea party. Anita, smiling back, accepted his offer gladly. This exchange of smiles and good intentions was like a ray of light in the fog of misunderstandings, a reminder that true friendship and family ties can withstand even the most awkward situations. Anita felt comforted in the fact that despite all the difficulties in relationships within her own family, she could still find shelter and understanding in Axion's home, where she was always welcome. It was a reminder that friendships and alliances built on respect and caring can be the foundation upon which support can be found in life's most unexpected moments. At the dawn of a new day, when the sun's rays had barely begun to break through the lush curtains of the Renati estate, it was time for breakfast, during which the family gathered together. In this morning's meeting, Anita's parents showed concern for Arabella, wondering if she was satisfied with the food offered and pressing her to add another portion, emphasizing the importance of good nutrition after so many years of separation. The atmosphere was filled with warmth and caring, albeit with a touch of awkwardness inherent in meeting after a long absence. Arabella's attention suddenly turned to Anita when she noticed that she was limiting herself to just salad, despite the variety of dishes on the table. This moment seemed ready to open the door to a new conversation, perhaps even a personal confession or discussion. But before Anita could react or explain her choice in any way, Marquise Renati, the matriarch of the family, beat her to it. With confidence and some determination in her voice, she said that Anita had always been frugal with her food, and that Arabella need not worry about that. The Marquise repeated her request for Arabella to focus on her diet, emphasizing that the girl seemed too frail after so many years of absence. Arabella's apology for her appearance and weight not meeting her parents' expectations opened the way for a deeper and perhaps more painful discussion. The Marchesa said it was their fault that while Arabella was starving, they had lived without denying themselves anything and asked Anita if she agreed with them. Suddenly, Marquise, taking responsibility for the situation, suddenly shifted her focus to Anita, bringing up her relationship with her sister and their different life paths. Noting that they felt Anita had behaved rudely by not wanting to introduce Arabella to Axion, the parents not only expressed disappointment in Anita's behavior, but also raised the topic of injustice and guilt. They began to blame Anita for the fact that she should be ashamed that Anita was living a good life while Arabella was starving, living on the streets, trying to cause her deep feelings of guilt and misunderstanding. Anita boldly voiced her opinion about the heavy burden of guilt her parents carried on their shoulders over the disappearance of Arabella, who vanished without a trace for a long 19 years. Anita, who had not experienced the joy of getting to know her sister, nevertheless felt the weight of guilt that her parents sought to shift onto her shoulders as well, and declared that they should stop. Her father's reaction to Anita's words was immediate and explosive, like thunder. He took her words as a challenge, as a disrespect to the elders, and shouted that she should not treat her parents like that. This moment was a boiling point for Anita, who, boiling with resentment and misunderstanding, stood up to take the decisive and defiant step of standing up for herself. She stated that she did not want to be part of a family game in which her role seemed imposed and insincere, then headed for the sanctuary of her room, seeking refuge from the storm of emotion and conflict. Her parents, stunned and annoyed by the sudden outburst of defiance, tried to stop her by raising their voices and expressing their disapproval of her behavior. Their words, filled with reproaches for rudeness and inappropriate behavior, echoed in the walls, adding heaviness to the already heated atmosphere of the house. That day, the dining room became the stage for a family drama that reached its climax when the father, losing control of his emotions, erupted in rage. His abrupt gesture, hitting the dining table like a thunderclap, sent a wave of consternation through everyone present. Arabella, an unwilling participant in what was happening, could not hold her plate, and it, like a symbol of shattered family tranquility, shattered on the floor, scattering shards and food. The momentary fear in Arabella's eyes was the catalyst that made the parents realize the consequences of their explosion of emotions. They immediately stopped their shouting, trying to restore the fragile calm of the house so as not to add to their daughter's consternation. Arabella, whose heart was filled with apologies for the spilled food, met understanding in her parents' eyes. They hastened to assure her that there was no fault on her, and that her act was no cause for anger or annoyance. However, in this situation, the parents did not fail to use the occasion to once again turn the arrows of accusations towards Anita, thus trying to justify their behavior. They began to slander the younger daughter, claiming that her character had always been far from ideal, thus trying to undermine Arabella's trust in her sister. Anita, remaining calm and collected in this whirlwind of family passions, chose to leave the dining room, leaving behind a space filled with tension and resentment. The father, convinced that he was obliged to punish Anita, ordered the maid to bring Anita to his office within the hour. Her father's order to meet in his office was another test for Anita, but instead of immediately giving in to panic or fear of punishment, she decided to use this time for herself to delve into the stories that helped her maintain her inner balance and fortitude. Anita, immersed in reading a book about her country's past, sought solace and distraction from her family's difficult situation. Reading about her country's past, its heroes and myths allowed Anita to feel part of something bigger, reminding her that every person has a role to play in the big story of life, and that every obstacle is just a step towards new discoveries and victories. The story of the founder of the empire and the mystical beast associated with Lake Alcente became for her not just a tale of the distant past, but a personal symbol of hope and possibility for something magical and transformative in her own life. Lake Alcente, the place where legend has it that the first emperor found his purpose with the help of a mystical beast, took on a special meaning for Anita after meeting Axion. This man became for her not only a friend or fiancé, but also a symbol of her own journey of self-discovery and inner transformation. In moments of doubt and trial, it was the thought of this place and her meeting with Axion that filled her heart with peace and confidence, that life was full of surprises, and every difficulty could lead to something significant and bright. This encounter with Axion on Lake Alcente may have been a pivotal moment in her life that helped Anita look at her trials in a new way, and learn to find comfort and strength in the stories of her people, in the legends of the past that inspire feats, and help her keep her faith in the best, even in the most difficult moments. One bright, warm-filled day, when the sun was shining brightly and the air was filled with the scents of summer, 10-year-old Anita came to her friend's tea party. Amidst the cozy conversations and laughter, all of a sudden, Rachel Sauvier, one of the friends, suddenly expressed her displeasure. She noticed that Anita was often distracted, looking away from the lake, as if the people she was talking to couldn't interest her enough. This made Rachel think that Anita might be bored in their company. Anita, caught off guard by this remark, hastened to assure her friend that this was not the case. She tried to convince Rachel that her attention was being drawn away not from boredom, but from something else, which did not detract from her interest in the current conversation. But Rachel, not inclined to back down so easily, asked a direct question about the substance of their dialogue, trying to draw Anita out. With a casual smile that only added to the charm of her appearance, Anita quickly found a way out of the situation, claiming that the conversation was about the love flower, an amazing creation of nature known for its beauty and wonderful fragrance. This moment not only eased the tension, but also redirected the conversation in a more pleasant direction, giving Anita a chance to reflect for a moment on how she would have liked this tea party day, filled with both cozy conversations and moments of awkwardness. In the shade of the cool day, as the soft rustling of leaves and a light breeze created an atmosphere of mystery around Lake Alcente, Anita became the center of attention not only to her friends, but also to a spirit invisible to the rest of those present that hovered unnoticed around her. This mysterious companion, whom only Anita could see and hear, shared his observations with her. Rachel was apparently following Anita relentlessly, as if eager to win her friendship. For her part, however, Anita responded to the spirit with mere thoughts, skeptically noting that Rachel's real interest was likely not in herself, but in her family. This invisible connection to the spirit held special meaning for Anita, for it was here, on the shores of Lake Alcente, that she had first encountered this mysterious being 2 years ago. From then on, every approach to the lake filled her with excitement and anticipation of a new encounter, once again giving her the opportunity to hear and commune with spirit. This place became something of a magical corner for Anita, where she could immerse herself in a world hidden from the eyes of others, a world where she could be herself and share secrets with an invisible friend. The spirit's sudden and disturbing voice that reported the accident at the lake made Anita instantly feel a sharp rush of adrenaline. The situation demanded immediate action, but when Anita looked around for adults to step in and help, she found they were alone. At that moment, time slowed its run. The girl's heart beat more frequently, and her breathing became sharp and intermittent. With full determination, she stood up, informing her friends of her intention to check out what was going on by the lake, and without wasting a second, she hurried to the water. Reaching the shore, Anita looked around the lake for someone in trouble, but the water was calm, and no one was in sight. The fear that the man might have already drowned overwhelmed her, making her act even faster. In desperation, realizing the lack of time and lack of help, she asked the spirit to bring her friends so they could help or at least know where she was. Without a moment's hesitation, Anita jumped into the cool embrace of the lake, cutting its surface in two, plunging into the depths. Underwater, in a world of silence and shadowed blue hues, where every sound became muffled and time seemed to slow down, Anita saw the girl slowly sinking to the bottom. She didn't waste a second, swimming sharply toward her, her every stroke full of determination and strength. At that moment, Anita became the only hope for the girl, slowly sliding into the embrace of the lake's abyss. Anita's heart was beating for two, for now she was not just a 10-year-old girl at a tea party. She had become a savior, willing to defy nature itself for the life of another human being. The moment Anita, desperately fighting for every breath underwater, realized the gravity of the situation, a scenario full of despair and hopelessness began to unfold before her eyes. For the first time in her short but colorful adventure, she felt the unbearable weight of reality weigh on her shoulders. She realized that despite her best efforts and desire to help, they could both end up at the bottom of the lake, swallowed up by its murky depths. But suddenly, as if by magic, a powerful water column rose from the depths of the lake which, like the hands of nature itself, gently but decisively pushed both girls to the surface and further, to the safety of the shore. This moment was so unexpected and magical that Anita could hardly believe what was happening. She realized that something beyond the ordinary had happened, something that had saved their lives. When she came to her senses on the shore, Anita saw a crowd of people gathered around to learn about the fate of the girls. Among them was Axion, a young man whose gratitude and relief for his mother's rescue was evident in his every movement and look. He approached Anita to express his gratitude for her heroism and determination. In that moment, Anita realized she was part of something much bigger than just a child's tea party by the lake. Her actions resulted in saving a life, and this was validated by a thank you from the very heart of a grateful son. Then Anita just looked into Axion's eyes and didn't even give her name, which after a while even amused her slightly. But what was more interesting was that even though Axion didn't know her name, he sent her a letter the next day, marking the beginning of their story. When Anita's hour of freedom came to an end, she found herself faced with the necessity of going to her father. With each step as she made her way across the expanse of the family estate toward her father's study, Anita unwittingly witnessed a conversation that could turn the fates of everyone in her family upside down. It turned out that Arabella, her sister, was faced with an unexpected ailment, memory loss, a disease that shrouded her life in a fog of mystery, for none of the invited doctors could explain the causes of her condition. In this confusion, Anita's mother showed determination, declaring that Anita's engagement to Axion should be broken off immediately. Her words sounded like a verdict, for she feared that rumors of Arabella's illness might destroy not only the girl's reputation, but also affect the welfare of the entire family. The eldest daughter, Arabella, her mother thought it possible to marry Axion, while circumstances still allowed it and rumors did not spread throughout high society. Anita's father, however, met these words with a certain doubt, suggesting that Arabella could even become the consort of a prince if the cards were played right. His words hung in the air like a distant dream that could bring the family not only glory but also unprecedented benefits. But the mother was adamant. She did not want to give her eldest daughter in marriage to a man famous for his love affairs and unable to remain faithful to one woman. The moment her father suggested that Anita needed to win the attention of the prince in order to thereby put her engagement to Archduke Axion behind her, the atmosphere in the room became tense. These words caused a storm of emotions in Anita's soul. She felt anger and disappointment fill her heart. The decision made without her consent was the last straw. Anita came to the conclusion that her attempts to maintain a relationship with her parents had been in vain, and now she no longer wanted to make the effort. Her irritation increased at the thought of her father taking her loyalty and devotion to the family for granted, believing that family ties imposed an obligation on her to remain obedient and faithful. He seemed convinced that Anita would never dare to reject her parents' plans and wishes, relying on the strength of family tradition and the authority of the Renati surname she bore. However, deep down Anita realized that despite her noble origins and belonging to the House of Renati, her parents had never truly considered her part of the family in the full sense of the word. This alienation and misunderstanding on the part of her loved ones only encouraged her to think that it was time to find her own way, independent of the desires and ambitions of her father and mother. Henceforth, Anita was firmly resolved to take her destiny into her own hands, refusing the coercion and restrictions imposed by family patterns and expectations. Within the luxurious walls of the palace, where every whisper and glance could tell a story, rumors about Anita's origins were spreading that made her feel like an outsider among her own family. Although she bore a noble surname and was part of high society, her lack of resemblance to her parents gave rise to speculation and gossip. The maids whispered, suggesting that Anita might have been adopted from the common people, making her the subject of endless discussion and speculation. Anita, whose dignity and honor were questioned by these baseless speculations, answered them with determination and severity. She tried to suppress the spread of rumors by taking harsh measures against those who dared to speak ill of her. Every maid who allowed herself to bring it up found that her services were no longer required. Anita realized that this gossip could only strengthen her sister Arabella's position, giving her the opportunity to take away what little Anita had, including Axion's attention. In her heart, Anita was convinced that she would not let this scenario play out. She was ready to fight for her place in the family and for her future, not to let gossip and speculation determine her fate. Despite the hostility and misunderstanding surrounding her, Anita remained steadfast, willing to stand up for her rights and interests in the fight for the justice and respect she deserves. On one of those days when the gravity of palace intrigue was particularly in the air, Hari came to Anita. This maid was more than just an assistant. She was a ray of light in the dark realm of conspiracies and secrets surrounding Anita. Harry brought news that could change the course of events. A knight named Rick Elmont, whose name was known far beyond their lands, had arrived at the manor. As a thank you for Harry's loyalty and support to Anita during these challenging times, Anita presented her with a beautiful hairpin. The gesture was not just a gesture of generosity, it was a recognition of the special bond that existed between them. The hairpin was not just a piece of jewelry, it was a symbol of the gratitude and respect Anita felt for Harry. When Harry left the room, she couldn't take her eyes off the jewel in her hands. The moment made her realize how valuable her choice to serve Anita had been. For if it had been Harry's lot to be with Arabella, she would not have had such moments of joy and pride in her mistress. The jewelry in her hands was not only a token of appreciation, but a reminder that kindness and loyalty are sometimes rewarded in ways you wouldn't even dream of. In the depths of her musings, Harry was enveloped in a thin shroud of melancholy as she pondered the image of Anita, whom she perceived as an exquisite and delicate flower thriving in the sheltered atmosphere of the greenhouse. This flower, in her eyes, was unprepared for the merciless gusts of the real-world wind, which only made her more anxious. Burdened by these musings, Harry felt disappointment at the simple but meaningful gesture Anita had not followed today, the affectionate touch, the stroking of her head, that had always been a source of comfort to her. Meanwhile, in another part of the castle, Anita was making her way towards a new day, descending the stairs to greet Knight Elmont. Her steps were full of anticipation of the meeting, for every such meeting was filled with the exchange of news and lively emotions. The knight, for his part, greeted her with a smile, his eyes sparkling with joy at seeing her again, the first in so long. Rick, not hiding his enthusiasm, openly admitted that their meeting was long overdue and his appearance here was no accident. He confessed that it was the desire to see each other that had brought him here. During the conversation, Rick shared his impressions of the recent events in the north where they had won a victory. However, he did not embellish the reality by pointing out that their success was modest and not as significant as it might seem at first glance. Moreover, he admitted that despite the victory, he had a hard time adapting to the harsh climate of those places. These words told of his feelings and experiences, of how even a warrior accustomed to hardship can face insurmountable challenges. One day, in a moment of genuine curiosity and a thirst for understanding of her circumstances, Anita approached Axion with a question that had long plagued her. She wanted to get to the bottom of the reasons for his family's unwavering loyalty to the Emperor. For it seemed they had the ability to do otherwise, to refuse to do his bidding, especially given their status and influence. Axion, a man who always weighed his every word, shared with her that their family was on a long search for something of great significance in the northern lands. This quest was so important and mysterious that their blind obedience to the Emperor allowed them to avoid unnecessary attention and suspicion from the authorities and others. This mission, shrouded in a veil of secrecy, became another layer in the mosaic of their family history. It had been a long time since then, and now that Rick had returned from the north, Anita wondered again about the mysterious purpose that had driven the Axion family. She wondered if they had succeeded in finding what they had hunted so hard for in the harsh northern lands. Meeting Rick, who had just returned from those very same places, had caused her to think and at the same time prompted her to express relief at his return. Anita didn't hold back and expressed to Rick her surprise and joy that he was lucky enough to return before winter set in. In the midst of their conversation, as the words flowed one after another, forming bridges of understanding and mutual interest, the air in the room was suddenly filled with a tension that foreshadowed an unexpected development. This unexpected turn began with the arrival of the Marquise, who complained loudly about not knowing about the arrival of the knight from the Archduke of Rakide. The Marquise's displeasure was clear and distinct. She made no secret of her irritation that important events were taking place in her house without her knowledge. However, as she crossed the threshold of the room, she masterfully changed her expression to a mask of outward grace and a lady full of nobility and grace. With a hypocritical smile, she apologized for her intrusion, as if she had unwittingly become a nuisance to those present. Rick, whose reputation and manners were always impeccable, responded to the gesture with equal elegance. With a polite bow, he introduced himself to the Marquise, showing respect for her status and personality despite the suddenness of her appearance. The Marquise, for her part, showed surprise, skillfully playing on emotion as if she were amazed and at the same time flattered that the deputy commander himself had taken the time to arrive in person to present her with an invitation to a tea party. Rick decided to dutifully declare that he had obeyed the order because it concerned Anita personally, that his arrival was due to the fulfillment of an order directly related to Anita. The atmosphere in the room became even more tense. The Marquise, whose tranquility had been disturbed by this revelation, did not conceal her surprise, declaring that she had not even suspected any connection between Anita and the Knights. Rick, without losing his dignity and composure, replied that Anita's connection to Rakiyad Manor was much deeper than it might seem at first glance. He recalled that Anita had saved Axian's mother, thus emphasizing her importance to all the people of the manor. The Marquise, unwilling to recognize the significance of Anita's act, haughtily remarked that it was a matter of bygone days, and that it was none other than the doctor, not Anita, who had played the key role in the rescue. At this point, Rick could barely contain the impulse of indignation within himself at such an ignorant and ungrateful attitude of the Marquise. Despite his emotions, he continued to hold back even as the Marquise began to question him about the details of the tea party invitation. When the Marquise extended her hand to take the invitation, thus demonstrating her superiority and right to control the events of the house, Anita decisively intercepted the initiative. With dignity and firmness, she stated that the invitation was addressed to her and not to the Marquise, thus emphasizing her role and importance in the matter. Anita said that it would be rude of her mother to read someone else's invitation. As Anita printed the invitation, the scent of roses gently enveloped the room, awakening memories and feelings. Axian's attention to detail, such as the rose petals inside the envelope, deeply moved Anita. Her heart filled with warmth at the thought of the upcoming meeting, and she didn't hesitate to tell Rick that she would definitely attend Axian's tea party, asking him to pass on that promise. The Marquise, on the other hand, saw this event as an opportunity for Arabella. Despite her previously demonstrated resentment and distrust of Anita, the Marquise began to make plans to use the tea party to her advantage. She loudly expressed her concern for Arabella, emphasizing that unlike Anita, Arabella had never participated in social events and would benefit from such an experience. It was a clever move to ensure Arabella's presence at the event so that Axian would see that Arabella was much better than Anita and marry the older daughter. Anita, understanding the Marquise's intentions, did not object. Instead, she decided to play along with her mother by offering to take Arabella with her. Marquise asked Rick excitedly if Rick was okay with it, and he nodded, saying that it was Anita's will. Rick said he had to go back, and that was the end of it. After Rick's departure, the Marquise, left alone with Anita, quickly turned the conversation to a more unpleasant topic for her, the arbitrary dismissal of maids, which included the Marquise's own maid. The Marquise was clearly unhappy with Anita's decision, perceiving it as an interference in her personal affairs and a possible weakening of her authority. Anita, on the other hand, remained calm and confident in her actions. She explained to the Marquise that the maids were insulting the honor of their masters by spreading gossip and misinformation, which could have serious consequences for the reputation of the entire estate. Anita stressed that her decision to dismiss the maids was not only to protect her own dignity, but also to prevent the spread of rumors that could have spread beyond the estate and damaged the Marquise's reputation in the wider community. It was only after all this that the Marquise accepted the dismissal of her maids, but she had something that she considered even more important. There was soon to be an audience with the Empress for her sister, Arabella, and Anita was called to accompany her to provide her sister with support and reassurance at this important moment. However, the hidden meaning behind this decision did not escape Anita's attention. She realized that her mother, the Marquise, had much deeper intentions than mere sisterly support. Anita understood that the Marquise saw the upcoming audience as a unique chance to present Anita as a potential candidate for the role of the prince's wife, if, of course, the Empress expressed a desire to see Anita as her future daughter-in-law. This state of affairs could lead to a drastic turnaround in Anita's personal life. Her engagement to Axian could be annulled without any hesitation. Anita, feeling the weight of the decision resting on her shoulders, tried to buy time. She gently remarked that it would be worth first obtaining the Empress's own approval for her presence in the palace. But the Marquise, whose plans were much more thorough and decisive, dismissed this argument as already decided. Standing up from the table and looking at her daughter with unyielding certainty, the Marquise left no room for doubt that Anita had to accept the inevitable. Axion must belong to Arabella. At the tea party, bathed in the warm light of the afternoon sun, Axion and his mother were discussing family matters when the conversation necessarily turned to Anita. Sadness tinged Axion's voice as he admitted that his lover's affairs had not improved, and things were as bad as they had always been. It made his mother remember Anita's words about wanting to move as far away from the family as possible once she reached adulthood. This desire for Anita to be away from her own home made her sad, but also made her realize the depth of the problems the girl faced in her surroundings. Axion's mother, despite the gravity of the realization that Anita wished to break with the family ties, still understood the girl's reasons for such a decision. In an effort to offer support and refuge, she offered Anita the opportunity to live with them until she reached adulthood, giving her the chance for a calm and protected environment where she could escape the pressures and demands of her family. However, feeling strongly about her responsibility to her family, despite the gravity of the circumstances, Anita replied that she could not accept such an offer. Her refusal was due not only to a sense of duty and loyalty, but also to the realization that such a move could be perceived as irresponsible to her parents, even though the relationship within the family was complex. Axion's mom, sitting across from him at the table, suddenly spoke words full of regret and sadness, opening her heart to her son. She admitted that she had done everything she could to save Anita from her unbearable home environment, and now she felt like she had missed her chance when she had the opportunity to bring Anita to her. These words emphasized the deep emotional connection and genuine care that Axion's mother felt for Anita, seeing her not just as her son's lover, but as a girl so desperately in need of support and understanding. Meanwhile, in her room, Anita sat alone, eating dinner by herself, as she was forbidden to join her family in the dining room. The reason for this was the accusation that she had been acting too rough lately. This isolationist sentence seemed particularly cruel to her, against the fact that only yesterday her parents had insisted on the importance of family dinners, declaring that it was in Arabella's best interest for all family members to get together. Such contrasting situations in Anita's life and in Axion's home emphasized the depth of the differences between their worlds. On the one hand, there was Axion's family, where understanding and sympathy, willingness to help and support reigned. On the other side was Anita's world, full of restrictions and conventions, where even within her own family she faced rejection and loneliness. The doors of her room creaked quietly as the butler of the Marquis's house appeared, a man usually secretive and reserved, but this time his gaze betrayed nervous tension. With the words that her father required her presence, he introduced a surprise into her evening. Anita, without losing her dignity, rose instantly, ready to follow the invitation. But her eye, shrewd and keen, caught something unusual in the butler's demeanor that made her linger. His gaze, wavering between respect and doubt, did not go unnoticed. With an ease that was unique to her, Anita ordered him to express his thoughts aloud, giving him no opportunity to avoid answering. The butler's disclosure of the nature of the Marquise's request, wishing to shift to his daughter the responsibility for matters he himself should have borne, was met by Anita not with irritation, but with a playful smile. Her reply, light but clear, was a clear warning. Any careless word could cost him his place in this house. As she walked past, leaving the butler in a state of mixed feelings, Anita confirmed her undisputed influence within the family circle. Butler, realizing that the young woman not only had the power to decide his fate on the estate, but was also capable of mercy. He nodded proudly in respect and acceptance of her instruction, deciding that he should hold his post as long as possible for the sake of Mistress Anita. This moment was not just an exchange of lines between mistress and servant, but a discovery of the underlying dynamics of a relationship where the ability to read between the lines and mastery of the art of unspoken threats are crucial to maintaining order and power. When Anita arrived at the Marquise's study, she found her father busy with the usual business of the estate and the immense amount of documents that were always piling up on his desk. The Marquis, wasting no time in preamble, went straight to the point of his daughter's visit. With an ease that might have appeared to an outsider with indifference, he put her in charge of another batch of documents. His words that Anita doesn't go anywhere anyway sounded less like a reproach than a statement of fact, for he thought she would have plenty of time, 4 whole days, to sort out the paperwork. This moment made Anita think deeply. After Arabella had returned to the family, her life had changed dramatically. Her parents had turned their backs on her, forbidding her to leave the estate and restricting her communication with the outside world. Now, in her father's words, she heard an accusation of her own isolation, even though she was in this situation by no choice of her own. Since childhood, helping her father with chores, she had been aware of her position in the family, invisible, unnecessary, always in the shadow of her missing sister. This reality left her with no choice but to accept the role she had been given and secretly prepare for the day she would come of age to cut ties once and for all with the family that valued her so little. However, despite the complexity of her inner feelings and the realization of her own insignificance in the eyes of her loved ones, Anita did not lose her determination. Her intention to maintain the fortunes and welfare of the family while she was still bound to it spoke of a deep devotion and sense of duty to family tradition. It was a quiet act of courage and self-sacrifice that she performed daily, maintaining the countenance of her home despite personal feelings and aspirations. Her father's sudden question broke the silence between them, as he, noticing Anita's silence, suggested that her silence came from fear of the task ahead, which he ironically called lightness. Unexpectedly, Anita found the strength and wit to respond to this challenge. With a slight, barely perceptible smile on her lips, she suggested to her father, with equanimity and evident irony in her voice, that since he considered the task so insignificant, she should undertake it herself. Her words, full not only of challenge but also of implicit criticism, provoked an immediate outburst of emotion in her father. The Marquis, unable to restrain his outburst of indignation, exclaimed that his purpose was to teach Anita independence, to prepare her for her future role as mistress of the Reikaday house. But Anita, not relenting, boldly met his arguments with her own remark about her mother, who as mistress of the house never touched papers, thus emphasizing that traditions and duties were distributed differently in their family and that the Reikaday house was no different in this respect. This exchange reached its climax when the father, losing control of his emotions, suddenly slapped the table. This gesture was not just an expression of anger or frustration, it symbolized a deep fissure between father and daughter, a disagreement over responsibilities and roles within the family. Anita, boldly and decisively, confronted her father, declaring her unwillingness to take on the exorbitant responsibility the Marquis was trying to place on her. Her words that Axion, unlike her father, would not shift his responsibilities to her emphasized her desire for fairness and equality in the distribution of family responsibilities. This moment was not just an expression of Anita's personal dissatisfaction. It symbolized her rejection of traditional submission and the beginning of finding her own way. The Marquis's silence after her words was evidence of his inability to counter-argue or offer a solution to the conflict. Anita's subsequent rejoinder, in which she urged her father to deal with his own affairs, sounded like the final verdict of their dispute. This moment emphasized not only her fatigue from the constant struggle for recognition in the family, but also her desire to change the established order. Anita's departure, accompanied by her father's shouts, urging her to reflect on her own behavior, and the subsequent slamming of the door, symbolized the generation gap in the Reikaida household. A week later, Anita was on the road, drowning in deep thought. As she sat in the carriage, she weighed every piece of information that had reached her. She was sure that her mother would stop at nothing to see Arabella within the walls of the Archduchy, despite all possible obstacles. Anita's heart filled with anxiety and involuntary aggression at the thought of the uncompromising methods her mother might have resorted to in order to achieve her goals. However, trying to push the gloomy thoughts away, she took a deep breath, trying to free herself from the weight of her accumulated feelings. Turning her attention to Arabella, who sat across from her and looked confused and lost in her musings, Anita decided to get her sister talking. Arabella, gathering all her will in her fist, looked Anita straight in the eyes. With a deep sense of responsibility and sincerity in her voice, she declared that she refused to follow their mother's designs. She was determined not to let her mother's plans ruin the warm and strong relationship that bound her to Anita and to Axion, around whom the whole scheme revolved. Arabella emphasized that the bond between the sisters was far more important than any intrigue, and she had no intention of betraying that bond for selfish purposes. Anita decided to continue the conversation, but her tone was devoid of any emotion, which made her question especially important. She asked Arabella what kind of happiness she wished for her and Axion, trying to understand the depth of her sister's thoughts. Arabella, smiling somewhat embarrassed in response to such a serious question, shared her belief that true happiness lies in being together with those you love, despite any obstacles and hardships that fate may bring. Her words were simple, but they contained a deep truth about the inseparability of true feelings and the importance of support and understanding between loved ones. Anita, thoughtfully perceiving her sister's words, could not help but feel doubts about the truthfulness of such an idealized view of life. The thought flashed through her mind that such statements might seem naive or even ridiculous, but Arabella quickly answered Anita's skepticism by explaining that this understanding of happiness and relationships had been instilled in her by the simple people who had once picked her up when she was lost as a child. Arabella remembered with warmth those who had given her support and a roof over her head in difficult times, certain that the family was now living happily ever after, thanks to their father's promise to send them gold in gratitude for his daughter's care. Anita, on the other hand, realized that their parents were not so kind. In an atmosphere of accumulated tension and anxiety, Arabella expressed her categorical unwillingness to marry Axion with open naivety, thus seeking to ease Anita's state of mind and emphasize her support. She wanted to show that she was willing to be a support for her sister in this difficult position, even if it meant opposing their mother's will. Anita, for her part, anxiously asked Arabella if their mother knew about her decision, to which Arabella replied in the negative, shaking her head vigorously. This gesture only increased Anita's anxiety, who realized with a heavy sigh that their mother would stop at nothing to carry out her designs without considering her daughter's wishes and feelings. This moment was filled with deep symbolism, emphasizing the gap between the pursuit of personal happiness and the pressures of family obligations and expectations. Anita bitterly recognized that their mother would be indifferent to her daughter's personal preferences and feelings, and she was willing to disregard them to achieve her goals. This realization added weight to Anita's shoulders as she realizes that they face a difficult choice between their own happiness and fulfilling a family duty imposed by their mother. In the secluded garden of Axion, where every turn of the path hid a new wonder, Arabella felt an exhilarating sense of wonder and delight. Surrounded by extraordinary beauty, she could not hide her amazement. The place was so picturesque that it was as if it embodied everything she had ever dreamed of, surpassing her wildest expectations. Axion, observing her reaction, shared his reflections. He argued that if he had known in advance that the weather would be so fine, he would not have hesitated to suggest that they meet on the shores of Lake Alkente. It was a place even more mesmerizing in its beauty, where the water shone under the rays of the sun, giving the impression of magic. Arabella, however, fully immersed in the atmosphere of the garden, recalled that the place of their present meeting was beautiful in itself, and she liked it here just as much. Her gaze was fixed on one of the flowers, which stood out among the others for its brightness and unusual appearance. With curiosity and tenderness, she approached Axion with a request, asking if she could touch and smell the scent of this amazing plant. From outside, watching the scene unfold in the garden, Anita couldn't take her eyes off her sister, Arabella. Arabella's attention was completely absorbed by one of the flowers, which she decided to examine closer. This flower, known as lovin, seemed particularly alluring, and Arabella, unable to contain her curiosity, leaned over to inhale its fragrance. After she took a deep breath, you could read on her face the strange sensation that had overwhelmed her. Nevertheless, she assured that the flower's fragrance was incredibly pleasant. A moment later, however, the situation changed dramatically. Anita, still watching her sister, noticed how Arabella's face suddenly turned pale, as if her skin color had mixed with the surrounding air, giving her a ghostly appearance. It was so sudden that Anita didn't even have time to react. Before Anita could come to her aid or even realize what was happening, Arabella fell softly to the ground unconscious. That moment frozen in time, leaving Anita in a state of shock and helplessness as she watched her sister lie unconscious amidst the splendor of a garden that had just been filled with an atmosphere of peace and beauty. When consciousness returned to Arabella, she found herself lying in an unfamiliar room, surrounded by a stillness and silence that seemed to her at that moment something external and distant. The first thing that caught her eye was the figure of Axion, who sat beside her bed, gazing into her face with an expression of care and attention. His presence in this silent room seemed to be the only connection to the reality that was slowly coming back to her after her sudden fainting spell. Suddenly realizing that she was not where she should be, Arabella jumped up on the bed, gripped by excitement and nervousness. Her eyes, full of questions and confusion, searched her surroundings for answers. Axion, remaining unperturbed and calm, quickly hastened to allay her fears, explaining that she had fainted in the garden, after which she had been brought here so that she could safely recover. His voice was full of sympathy, and he wondered how she was feeling after what had happened, trying to make sure she was okay. Instead of answering his question, however, Arabella's first reaction was alarm at Anita's absence. Her concern for her sister was immediately reflected in her voice and look. Axion, understanding her anxiety, hastened to assure her that Anita was safe in the doctor's company and that they would both be back soon. These words should have given Arabella some comfort, though she still felt lost in this unforeseen situation, surrounded by the walls of a room that, though filled with warmth, remained foreign and incomprehensible to her. In the back of the room, where soft light framed the contours of the furniture, creating a cozy atmosphere, Arabella gazed at Axion. Her thoughts involuntarily drifted back to a recent conversation with her mother, in which the latter, not without a share of maternal intuition, had suggested Axion's possible feelings for her daughter. Her mother was convinced that Arabella was able to win the young man's attention, truly believing that a special bond could be born between them. However, Arabella, thoughtfully considering Axion, could not share this optimism. There was no doubt in her heart as to where Axion's feelings were actually directed. She noticed his eyes flirt with sparkles as he turned his gaze to Anita, as if every glance he gave toward his sister was filled with a special light and warmth that could not go unnoticed.